Hi, I'm Sarah Beth Goer.
And I'm Jennifer Jill Araya.
Welcome to the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, where we discuss the art and craft of audiobooks, and we aim to go deep quick.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Crafting Audiobooks podcast. Our guest for this episode is someone I am so excited to talk to. Sarah and I have been trying to get this interview scheduled for like a year and a half at this point. We are thrilled to have with us today audiobook producer Jonathan Pennock. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. Happy to be here. And yeah, sorry it took so long.
No, that's okay. Well, as you said in our, pre-interview conversation, it is happening exactly when it's meant to be happening. So we are glad that you're here today. Because we're a podcast that likes to go deep quick, we are going to dive right into the first question, which today is all about auditions. So, Jonathan, when you're listening to auditions, what makes one audition stand out over the others?
I think I would say at first, it's pretty easy to know immediately how connected a narrator is to the material. I try to be pretty targeted with our reach outs. I think it sounds like other publishers do mass audition calls for certain books, but we try to keep it pretty targeted. So I pick pretty specific sections for certain roles as well. So I put a lot of time into that, and I try to give as much information as possible ahead of time. So yeah, I think, the first 10, 15 seconds, it's really easy to know if the narrator is connected to the material, has taken the notes provided, is interested in it. Unfortunately, it does happen where you can tell, that the narrator might be either busy that day and just kind of cranking out auditions as they go throughout the day. So I would take it, obviously seriously. So yeah, I think just engaged and connected to the material is the first thing that really sticks out.
So you mentioned that you take a lot of time and care choosing the excerpts that you are sending out for these auditions. What are you looking for when you're picking what portion of the text people will be auditioning with?
Yeah, so I try to find a pretty dynamic scene that includes a lot of dialogue. And, for example, if it's a romance, when the female character first meets the main male character, how that connection works. And, I just want to show the author as well how they would handle the main characters. If there's certain accents that are really important to the book, I try to fit stuff like that in. If it's pretty complicated or if there's a lot going on, sometimes I'll even have them read two different sections. I don't want to ask the narrator to do too much, in these auditions ahead of time. But if it's really, really necessary, and I want to show the author what the narrators can do, sometimes I'll add a little bit more in there. But really, just try to find a good section that will cover a lot of the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, hit the heart of the book. Plus, if there's dialogue, like exactly. the main characters.
Yeah, how they'd handle the characters, how they'd handle accents, how they would handle a really intense scene. Try to get as much as possible in 3 to 5 minutes, usually 5 minutes. Sometimes I'll go over, but try not to. And that's that's a good opportunity for the narrator to really go for it too. So, and when I go back to that first question, if it comes off a little flat at first, it's really going to be noticeable with those scenes.
Is there anything else? Because you had mentioned the first thing that strikes you is you can really tell, is the narrator connected or not connected? Does anything else come to mind? So once you've sorted through, I sent it to 5 narrators and these 3 were connected, anything else that really strikes you or stands out in auditions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, generally speaking, it's hard to nail it down, but if it's like a first person narration, you have a pretty good personal idea of what the main character is, what their characteristics are like, and you usually have a good idea of what the narrator you're reaching out to sounds like. But hearing them come together, does it fit? Does the voice really fit the character? Does that work? And I think that's pretty easy to spot right away. And again, we've all said it, but that's subjective. But I guess that's my job. So I have to listen and be like, yeah, I think that fits the character for sure. And I'll pick a handful of those that meet at least that requirement and go forward. But other stuff like, and I think this might come up later, but something that's really important to me is just a really comfortable listen. I mean, it can be a really intense scene or a really soft scene, but it still needs to be pleasant to listen to, and it needs to be paced appropriately. Little stuff like that for me goes a long way. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can go into that first 10 to 15 minutes or seconds, but I will say I listen through the entire thing, even if it doesn't hit me right away.
There's so much you can tell in that first couple seconds, but then you give it that chance. You really give it a thorough.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, it might be just they're shooting these auditions off throughout the day, but they'll warm up to it and get into it as it goes, and by the end of it, I might be more convinced than I was at first. So I do try to listen all the way through. It's only right. They took the time to do it. So
I think that's a good reminder to narrators, though, to like warm up before you start recording, so that it strikes right off the bat. It's a good reminder.
Yeah, I know. I can only imagine how many folks are doing even a day sometimes. So I'm sure it's not easy. But yeah, we're going through it once, listening back, and maybe trying it again. That'd be my recommendation, because yeah, authors are going to do the same thing I'm doing when they're listening to it and they're approving it or not approving it. They're going to listen to that first, 10, 15 seconds and either move on to the next or continue through, but you never know.
Sure. I love what you had to say about, does the narrator's perception sort of fit what you had in mind, and how that's a subjective thing. But in a lot of ways, I think that subjectivity is what makes producing audiobooks just as much of an art as the narration of audiobooks. That sort of matching of the narrator with the text, that pairing is subjective. So it is inherently a creative act. And just wanted to say, I think that's part of where your creativity comes into your job process.
Yeah. And, I wish I could be more creative at my job, but yeah, that's definitely the most creative part of it so far. I mean, when I get an opportunity to direct and stuff like that, but yeah, it's hard it's interesting you say that, because it's hard. It's easy to lose sight of that at times, because we do have a somewhat substantial influence on how it comes out, even though the bulk of the performance, obviously, production comes from the narrators. But yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I think that was really well put, and Jennifer, a really great insight. Yeah. Jonathan, I'm curious, what makes up great narration is in some regards subjective. What's a quality that you really enjoy in narration craft that that somebody else might disagree with or not think as important as you do?
Yeah. This kind of just calls back to what I was speaking about. So I don't know if it was funny. I was doing PJ's masterclass earlier this month, and one of the narrators pointed something out that kind of actually really clicked with me when she was listening to some of my feedback. I guess I come from a more like musical, not background necessarily, but way of approaching listening to audiobooks. So something that really, the foundation, I guess, really is important to me. So what that means to me, I guess, is pacing, the cadence, pauses, living in the pauses, finding those moments where you need to separate clauses, or if it's shifting directions or ideas or whatever, how it's shaped and how, I guess, composed or musical it is to just listen to, not outside of the context of the story, and accents necessarily, but just how the sound is, I guess, being delivered. It could be a whatever, an academic nonfiction that I have no interest in, but if it's musical, if it's like really enjoyable to listen to, and I can tell the narrator is into it, I can get into it really easily. So I'm not sure if that's really answering it very well, but and a lot of dynamics, and I guess that's probably important to a lot of folks. But yeah, I get real picky. Like if it's too fast, it can really turn me off, because I think, well, I'm just slow in general. I'm always pausing and rewinding, hitting that 30-second rewind on Audible constantly. I just get distracted too. But yeah, I think pacing is huge for me, and cadence and all that kind of stuff. How it's delivered. Really
Yeah,
important.
that's a really brilliant answer, I think. And, like the way what you're saying strikes me is it's like there needs to be this like sound structure, like this place to land so the listener kind of feels secure and held in this way that's hard to, define or describe. And it's also like I know exactly what you're speaking to, like as a listener of audiobooks. And it's also really interesting as a narrator because I wouldn't want any people who are maybe earlier on in narration listening this to think like, oh, I should think about the musicality of what I'm saying, because like in my experience is that the way that sort of like safe place to land gets created is through deep connection to the text, not through like overthinking and overanalyzing or thinking about how one sounds. That it's like if I'm so deeply in the pocket and connected to this material, then it emerges with this. Like that's where the sound structure comes from. In the same way that like I don't know why this analogy is coming to me. I don't know anything about building houses, but like there's this strong foundation of like deep connection to the earth, like, and if you only think about like, I want the windows to look like this or something, like this, the structure is not sound.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So I was speaking to someone just last weekend about a book that they had listened to that was narrated by Grover Gardner, incredible narrator for, anyone listening. And it was a very, very dry nonfiction. And the person who had listened to it, and I actually added it to my TBL list as a result of this conversation, but the person who was listening said that it was, by subject and also by writing style, it was probably the driest audiobook that they had ever listened to. But the way that Grover narrated it, he was so invested in the text, and he sounded like he was so fascinated by it that they actually were fascinated by the audiobook too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's maybe a little bit what you have in mind, Jonathan, that when the narrator is really invested, as a listener, you can trust that the narrator is interested in the material, is invested and has a stake in what that book is. And yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. I stuck with him for a while, and with the Stephen King's The Stand years ago.
Oh,
I love Stephen King stuff, but he definitely goes off on some really long, mostly unnecessary tangents, and but just listening to Grover, it was completely fine with me.
yeah.
Let's tell me more about this character that we'll probably never ever see or hear from again for the rest of the book.
My husband just did a re-listen of The Stand a couple months ago, so he was talking about the same thing, that it goes off in tangents, but you're fine just being in the moment with the text and the narrator.
Yeah, he builds such fun and unique characters, so it's not a big deal. And yeah, listening to Grover tell it's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think just come down to it, I mean, just picky about the little stuff, but that stuff goes a long way for me, just to make a comfortable listening experience,
Sure. Well, I think pacing especially is something that people don't necessarily realize has such a huge impact. But our eyes move a lot faster than our ears can process sound and understand it. And, if it's a scene that's just saying, like the chair was here and the door was there, our eyes can skim that really fast. And so, especially newer narrators, but sometimes me too, when I'm not paying attention, can just whiz through that material, not realizing that the listener needs a chance to create visuals of that based on what I'm saying. And that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It needs the time that it needs.
Yeah, and everything needs its own little mini emotional journey. So, just kind of breaking it up and making it fluid, I think, goes a long way.
For sure. Well, Jonathan, I would love to know, what is something specific that you have learned about your craft of audiobook production over time that has a really big impact on how you do your job day to day, how you do your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I've learned over the years is just to be really thorough with communication, whether that's with narrators, studios, other vendors, really setting expectations at the forefront of a project. Just because, obviously a project can get really slippery real quick if you're not connecting narrators together to go over pronunciations or discussing accents thoroughly enough ahead of time, or if it's a nonfiction title, how to deal with charts and graphs and stuff like that. But I think because that can just start snowballing, and it can really start weighing you down later on, farther on down in the project, and just start causing issues for proofers and engineers and stuff like that. So yeah, I think just trying to be as thorough as possible when reaching out to folks and giving them as much information as possible, what my expectations are, like reaching out with studios and our expectations of a punch read as opposed to a cold read. And when I first started out, I wasn't as specific, and then all of a sudden we're getting files in and we're realizing it's a cold read and we didn't plan for that, and then now we have to kind of scramble and get someone to edit it. So stuff like that. I think that's the biggest thing is and it's issues still come up, but not nearly as much as there were when I first started. And it's never going to be 100%, but yeah, I think just trying to be, upfront and clear with your needs and communication goes a long way.
Yeah, really creating that, we talked about sound structure, like craft wise in this way that's difficult to describe, but now we're talking about like sound structure, like project technical wise, like are we all on the same page so that we have this like communication container that then holds the space for this creative container that gets created. I said creative a lot, but I think people can follow me here.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, when you have a dual read, two narrators, usually that's fine, but you get 3, 4, 5, it can get real complicated real fast. So just setting up a room or an email thread and keeping lines of communication open and keeping that rolling, just to make sure it all flows perfectly smoothly downstream.
Yeah, and that's definitely a huge part of the producer's craft is crafting that clear communication for everybody. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, with the amount of titles, at least that we're working on, it's important that you have as many boats flowing straight as possible. One starts getting wiggly, it'll just disrupt the whole group.
Yeah. I've worked on a couple different multi-cast, multi-narrator projects with you, Jonathan, as the producer. And I think it also, when you set up that clear communication and, here's who's going to be taking the lead on certain pronunciations, and here's how you're going to handle, sharing character samples or whatever. I think when you share that expectation up front with us as narrators, it helps us all be more creative because we know the guardrails. It's a little bit like, the concept that having some constraints and some guidelines actually increases creativity when if you've got, infinite possibilities for how this project is going to play out, it's a little bit too scattered. And so you can't actually, as a narrator within that context, be as creative as you can be. I'm thinking of one book in particular that I think had maybe 4 narrators on, and I was one of them. And ahead of time, like when you introduced us all to each other, you're just like, here are the characters. Here's what you're each going to be doing. Here's what you're each responsible for. And it was very freeing for me as a narrator on the project, knowing that everything was taken care of so I could focus on my creative work. So
imagine that. If only we had like something like a director that could help.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. I mean, you weren't directing our recording sessions for that project, but it did very much feel like you were the director for the project, not just the producer.
Oh, I know. I'm just complaining a little bit that we can't have directors on every title.
Indeed.
The way it goes right now. And another one, I think I also mentioned this at your retreat. It's really easy to get worked up with the stress of all this stuff, but man, it's just audiobooks at the end of the day. It's not life or death work, and that's, you start thinking, you just remind yourself of that, and it kind of calms you down a bit, because you can get yourself twisted up tight real quickly in this line of work. And deadlines are deadlines, sure, but man, it's just an audiobook. Take a breath, it'll be fine.
Like Andy Arndt says, there's no such thing as an audiobook emergency.
That's right. Yep.
Well, we have reached our last question of the day, and this is a question that all 3 of us are going to answer. And the question is, what is exciting you about the craft of audiobooks right now, today? And Jennifer, will you start us off?
Sure. So what's exciting me today is a note that I got from an author several months ago, but I'm working on another book by this author right now. I was recording it before this interview, and it was probably one of the nicest author notes that I've ever received. And the book that I'm currently recording is the second book in a series, and it will probably be the final book in the series, although not my choice. But the author hadn't planned actually to write the second book. So the book that I am recording right now, the author had not intended when she wrote book 1. But the listeners and readers really wanted more from these characters, and so she decided to write the next installment. And as she was writing the book that I'm currently recording, she reached out to let me know that she really loved my performance, which is always really nice to hear. But she also had some really specific comments about the way that I voiced specific characters, and one character in particular, and how that sort of helped her understand and see that character in a way more deeply than she had before, which was kind of just mind-blowing to me. But what's super cool is that now in the second book that I'm currently narrating, I can kind of feel how the authors and my shared understanding of this character is coming through in her writing. And so then it can show up more deeply in my performance. And it's just a lot more closely than I'm used to collaborating with a traditionally published author. I do work with independent authors a fair amount, but with a traditionally published author, it is not often that I have these kinds of really deeply collaborative experiences. And I am just really grateful that the author reached out to me, and incredibly grateful that I'm now getting to narrate book 2 with these characters, so that I'm able to kind of play with that shared understanding that the author and I have about who these characters are, and that I get to experience them again. So it's been really cool. I'm enjoying the book I'm working on right
now. That is especially exciting. We've talked many times on the podcast about how audiobooks are collaboration between the author and the narrator and even the listener. And to hear this direct, like, back and forth collaboration, like, what? How cool is that?
Yeah, it's really neat. I'm I'm definitely excited about it for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wish that would. I wonder how often. I haven't heard a whole lot of. I haven't heard that happen a whole lot, but I wish it would happen more. I feel like authors, they're getting more and more involved in these in the audiobook process as it is. So yeah, I hope they kind of take this whole process into account and write with that audiobook in mind, you know.
Sure.
It might be happening more often than we know, in that the authors might not, write that note, or it might be influencing them subconsciously. I imagine it often depends on how connected the author feels to the audiobook, right? Because for some authors, they're not audiobook listeners, and it's just part of the business. And for others, they might have this deep collaborative connection.
Yeah.
That's
and
cool,
truthfully, I'm not sure that the producer for this project even knows that this happened, because the author reached out to me on social media
nice.
when the first book was released. And so we had a conversation about it at that point. But yeah,
That's cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Shaping the series.
Indeed. Sarah, what about you? What is exciting for you about audiobooks right now today?
Well, I'm chewing on. I think we've brought up on the podcast before, and I've shared my opinion before. Some people say like the genre doesn't matter because you're not playing a genre, right? You're just being in the world and the character, and so like the genre is irrelevant. Don't think about the genre. And I disagree. I think the genre does matter, and yes, you can't play a genre. Like, don't be like, it's a horror book, I'll be spooky and create a generic spooky tone. But like the fact that it is a horror book changes like the perception of what the imagery is and who you're talking to, and like the shape of the musicality, but not through a conscious like I'll do horror shape, but through like deep connection. And I got excited because I did this audition where the fact that the genre mattered like really helped me more specifically bring the audition to life, because it was a like middle grade horror book. And the author had included a note that the producer passed on about how like they really wanted the spookiness of this gothic influenced kids horror book to like build over time. And it was a scene earlier on, and there wasn't really anything very spooky on the page. And as I was, working on the audition, two things really helped to bring it to life. And one is like, I'm talking to a child. So it's it's third person narration, but like, who is the listener? The listener is a child. That changes, not me thinking like, I should talk in a certain way that children listen to, but like just by knowing that I'm talking to a child, that shifts what naturally comes out of me. Okay, there wasn't anything that spooky on the page, but there were some trees and there was some mist, and knowing like this is a horror book that builds over time, I'm not gonna be like the trees are spooky, but just to shift the imagery of like what are those trees and that mist that would be different if it were like a fantasy book, or if it were, I don't know, like a sort of more literary fiction book, like the image of the trees and the fog like changes based on the genre, which then changes what emerges. So I just got really excited about this like very specific example where I was like, see, the genre totally matters, and it shaped the tone. Yeah, I geek out about this stuff.
I love that. And I mean, if you think about a movie, I find a lot of the ways that I relate to audiobooks is very cinematic and sort of visual in that way. A movie that is a mystery or a thriller versus a rom-com is going to have different music. It's going to have different lighting, and it's often going to have different like color elements in the scene and the staging and the costumes. So all of those things we need to somehow encapsulate in our audiobook narration. So yeah, genre matters. I'm definitely in your camp, Sarah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to put it. Like, but how am I supposed to translate that into how I'm actually working on the picture it differently, and then it emerges differently. Yeah, and see that cinematic vision in one's mind that helps guide. Yeah,
I saw a little reel of clips from the Gilmore Girls. but with horror music underneath it. And it totally works to make it seem like Gilmore Girls from these, specific clips that they picked is like a stalker horror movie or show or something. So it just kind of goes to show that the tone that you take really influences whether it comes off as, fun rom-com Gilmore Girls or horror stalker Gilmore Girls. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yep, you got to find that atmosphere for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jonathan? What's exciting you right now today?
Lately, so I made it a point this past year to start doing a lot more of these narrator retreats, workshops. You're still the only podcast. I don't know if this is this tied to your other one as well, the first one I did?
No.
Not? Okay. Well, I've only done 2 podcasts and it's been with you. So, but yeah, so I've just been trying to get more into the community and figure out how these workshops are going and learn more myself and find new narrators. It's been a blast. It's been challenging at times for me just because it's new for me, but I've really enjoyed it and hoping to do more. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing the last year, and that's been pretty exciting. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you two. There was another question you didn't get to. I was kind of hoping you would because I really wanted to talk about it.
Well, please, let's
do
talk
it.
about it.
Tell us which question it was.
I can't remember. Was it like a favorite project or a favorite narrator or something?
Yeah, share if you've got a project that you love and you really want to talk about, how you crafted that project. Talk about it.
Deal. Only if you two do the same, like a favorite. It doesn't have to be one you narrated.
Okay.
One you listened to as well, like last year or something like that. But I've been talking about this book. I produced. It's probably been over a year now, year and a half. So it's by this author, Steven Erickson, and why it's pretty significant to me is when I was an engineer, engineering audiobooks, recording them. I got into this fantasy series with Michael Page, who's a local narrator here in Brilliance. And it's this huge, epic fantasy series. And I just got, and we were doing these, they were like 45-hour books. No joke. They were like 1,200 page books. And we were recording them back to back to back. I just got lost into this world and I was just like taken into it, and it just got me. It just was kind of like the impetus of me wanting to get more into audiobooks, like directing and then producing and all that kind of stuff. Just really got me into it. Anyway, so I've been obsessed with this author and I've been reading his stuff for a while now, and he has this 6-7 book collection of short stories. Short, they're still pretty long. They're probably normal novel length, but anyway, and they're a little bit more easily consumable fantasy. That's like it follows these 2 nefarious necromancers and their unlucky manservant as they go across the country and just cause chaos. But anyway, so that came on my desk and I was just like, this is awesome. I get to produce this book. And I've been obsessed with this narrator, Nicholas Bolton, for the longest time. And I'm like, I got to get him on something. And this book came along my desk and I had him audition and the author loved it and I loved it. And it's out there and I can't stop listening to it. And I want more people to listen to it because it's just so good. Like everything about it. It's got a lot of humor to it. It's got that fantasy stuff to it. There's a lot of good messaging behind it. And it's just so good, top to bottom. Like he is just one of my favorite narrators. He just hits it perfectly.
That is so exciting. Like the combination of it being this author who so inspired you to get into to get your hands, I don't know, in the clay of the industry more deeply, and the beautiful way that fantasy can just like, create these worlds that just take over our imaginations, and this marriage of this narrative you love to this material. Like, what an exciting thing. Did you say the title of?
Oh, I didn't. I got so into. So it's there's 2 this is the first and second collected tales of the Bocalane and Corbel brooch. I know it's a mouthful. I don't. I could.
I know.
spell
Like,
it.
wait, how do I even spell that to search on?
So it's Bauchelin, Bocalane and Corbel brooch. Highly recommend. Like Nicholas Bolton's just like he just gets it. Like I was talking earlier, like his pacing is excellent. He's incredibly engaged in the narrative. He pulls you in, and his character voices are just insane. Like he just gives everyone a distinct personality. Like he's just perfect. And yeah, anyway, the stories are good and all that kind of stuff. So highly recommend it.
It's really exciting. Thank
So
you.
Sarah, since you're on the mic now, what's been your either favorite project to listen to casually or perform?
Yeah, I'm debating whether to which one to. Okay, I'll go with one I performed that also. So this has only happened to me like twice in my audiobook career, that when I'm actually prepping the audiobook, it comes to life so vividly in my imagination that I feel like I've already listened to the audiobook. Like that's sort of how like encapsulating the world is for my imagination. And this was one of the two. It's called The Infinite Miles by Hannah Ferguson. And it's this queer sci-fi tribute to or homage to Doctor Who. And even though it's sci-fi, it's very like literary fiction-y in sort of like its subtlety and nuance and like that sort of the main, even though there are all these like very exciting sci-fi elements happening and this really exciting world created, like what really sticks with me is the relationships, which were complex and queer. And I just loved this book so much. And like, I just got to do really like funky, cool things. Like there's a sentient spaceship that at one point is communicating with the main character, like through the radio in a song that's described as being like a 70s David Bowie-esque song. So I got to like make up what the F that was and like my own melody and sing that and be the yeah, like it was such a immersive world that the author created, and I felt so connected to the material. And it's one of those stories, it's like, we're constantly growing as audiobook narrators, and it's like, oh, I wish I could go back in time and record it with the like skill I have now, but I'd feel the same way 10 years later and 10 years later and 10 years later. So but that's one that just really sticks with me. Yeah.
Nice. On the wish list.
I love that.
What about you, Jennifer?
Sure. So I am a huge audiobook listener, and so I'm going to name some things that I've not narrated, but that have really shaped who I am as a narrator. And it was entirely possible when Jonathan asked this question for me to narrow it down to one. So I have 4 that I'm going to recommend really quickly. But the first one, and probably one of the biggest ones, is The Change by Kirsten Miller, which was narrated by January Lavoie. It is a really powerful and deep book that is all third-person POV, but very distinct, limited POVs from multiple different characters. And the way that January handled those transitions between the different third-person limited POVs and completely changed her style of narration to match whichever POV she was narrating at that moment is a masterclass in how to handle various points of view, I think. Really, really good book, but just so masterfully narrated. So that's number 1. Number 2 is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson and narrated by Michael Kramer. And I had, full disclosure, had not actually listened to any of Brandon Sanderson's books before this. I had read some of his books, but had not listened. But I was hired to narrate the book that sort of comes after Tress of the Emerald Sea. And so I wanted to listen to this one first and was not expecting to get a narration masterclass. And yet I did. The tone of the book, you don't realize until you're pretty far into it that it's actually first person, because the person who is narrating it is sort of omniscient. And so it feels like it's third person all the way through, but he's actually telling stuff that he knows himself personally, which you don't realize until you're most of the way through the book. But the way that Michael, infuses the narration with the sarcasm and wit of that third person sort of, but actually first person narrator is just, again, a masterclass in making sure that your narrative has just as much character and energy and connection as the dialogue lines do. A lot of times when I'm working with newer narrators, they're like great and on top of really being emotional and connected on the dialogue, but struggle to be connected on the narrative. And in Tress of the Emerald Sea, it's like, this is what it means to be connected to the narrative, is that book. Then the next one is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, narrated by Kirsten Potter, who I love her narration just in general, but specifically on that book, this is another one that is a very sweeping story and a lot of different storylines that don't seem to be connected at first, but actually are connected. And she does a really good job of very subtly sort of hinting at how those various sections are connected. And it sort of is what you were talking about earlier, Sarah, with the genre hints being there. So you kind of pull on those hints and allow the listeners to understand them. And if it was narrated differently, the listener wouldn't pick up on those connections. And that's what Kirsten Potter does in Station 11. She allows the different threads of the storylines that do connect, but just are so subtle and so light. And she's not hitting them. I mean, it's not like, neon sign here, this is how it's connected, because that would, ruin the subtlety of it. But in such a delightful, sensitive, subtle way, she's really pulling on those connections so that they're there. And then my fourth one, I actually thought of first when Jonathan asked the question, because it connects to what Jonathan was saying about pace, which is actually a book that Sarah narrated, A Year Today by Robin Benway. It is a masterclass in pacing, I think, because it's a book that is, if I say too much about the book, it's going to give away some of the things about the book, but just the way that you paced A Year to the Day, Sarah, was so sensitive and so appropriate to the text and allowed the big twist at the end to be a true surprise. But at the same time, when it happened, it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. A lot of times, depending on how a book is narrated, when you get to that final twist at the end, it can be like, what? Where did that come from? But by adjusting the pacing ever so subtly, you can allow the listener to not figure out the twist, but to understand how the twist happened when you figure it out, like when you hear it and get to that point in the book. So it's a combination of pacing to allow discovery while also pacing to guide. And your pacing in that book when someone talks about pacing, I still think about that book because I feel like that is what pacing should be.
That's one of my other
inappropriate to the text.
Thank you. Oh, wow. I'm very honored. That's one of my other favorite books that I've ever narrated. And I do talk about collaboration. For that book is masterfully written. The author is a National Book Award winner. And the editor, I know there was collaboration because the book is about grief. I think we can say that without ruining too much. And so the pacing, embodying the pacing of grief, and trusting myself to do that meant that yes, sometimes the gaps were I know that the editor was very involved in ensuring that that pacing that I created as narrator was honored, and yet tweaking so that it was very digestible for the listener as well, so that was definitely a collaboration and illustration of the art of the pacing by the narrator and the editor.
For sure.
Working together.
I know some people listening to A Year to the Day and not really thinking about the fact that like this is about grief might be like, oh, the pacing is so slow. No, it is as slow as it needs to be because grief is hard and heavy. And that's the pacing that you gave it. And then also, like I said, that twist at the end is a really powerful one. And if the pacing hadn't been the way that it was throughout the entire book, you wouldn't have been able to, it would have either felt like it came out of nowhere or it would have been figured out like 20 chapters earlier. So, yeah.
Wow. I love that you asked this question, Jonathan. This is very juicy and exciting. And Jennifer, it was so cool to hear your answers about why each book. Like,
like I said, I'm a really avid audiobook listener, and I'm also very critical when I listen. I a lot of times don't like the choices that narrators make. So we're not going to go into the ones that I don't like.
But that teaches us too.
Yes.
And it's subjective.
No,
Some other person might be like, I love that this narrator did this thing, right? It helps us refine our own subjective connection to the craft.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nope, that was selfish on my part too, because this is all going to my wish list. So,
all right, I'm gonna throw one more in there because it was the one that I didn't narrate that comes to mind when you ask, which is The Midnight Library, which was narrated by Carey Mulligan, who is one of my favorite actresses in the whole world. And her narration to me, so like she's not an audiobook narrator, she's a film actress, and so to me, like sometimes her character voices like blend together in a way where it's like I actually only know. Occasionally I only know who was talking because of the dialogue tags. But it didn't matter because it was a masterclass in deep connection to the text. And so I feel like listening to that, like brought to life for me what it is to connect so deeply to the story that the like it just emerges so profoundly and humanly, even without like perfection of, character craft.
Yeah.
And the story is just so inspiring and meaningful to me. Like I just love that, the story is about living deeply, thriving as a human, and lessons about how to do that. So. Okay. Thank you for letting me throw one more in there. I just had to.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm sure this could go on for a while.
Oh yeah, we could spend 2 more hours, I'm sure. But we will not. We will wrap up the episode by saying thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here. It's been a blast.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It did go by pretty quickly. I hope whatever came out of my mouth made sense and someone got something out of it.
I understood all the things you said, so I'll presume that most listeners will as well.
Good deal. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Crafting Audiobooks. We've been your hosts, Sarah Beth Goer
and Jennifer Jill Araya.
Wishing you happy audiobook listening and/or crafting.
Bye for now.